definitely a lot of talking that happens when you get a bunch of pastors in a room together, even when maybe we're not supposed to be talking. But it's amazing when you get to sit down over a meal or relax with something to drink and just be with one another. Do you remember how amazing it is to take those moments of pausing and breathing and just being with someone else? It's a little harder to do that over Zoom. We can still meet and we still learn, and while we cannot easily fill up the virtual room with chatter, we can definitely fill up the chat box. But it's still hard to just be present. This week at RIM, our theme was conflict, how to address conflict in the church and within ourselves, and we addressed this through the lens of race and racism. And out of these conversations and lectures and the virtual worship and the prayer and the reflection and the meditation, I found myself still continuing to circle around this word that God has been nudging towards me off and on this week: authentic. How can we be authentic in conflict? Now, granted, to my knowledge, there isn't an emoji that we can use to represent authenticity. And even if there were, today's emoji is actually sad face. We're talking about going beyond just the sad face. And that sad face emoji, that frown, it's the emoji that we click on social media or send over text when we hear news that is sad or disappointing. It's the one that is often used when someone shares online that they've lost a loved one, lost a job, or they share any other issue with which they are struggling. We send a frown, and sometimes that's all we feel led to do at the moment, just to simply say virtually, "I'm so sorry this happened. I hear this, I hear you," and that's all I can do in this moment. Now, some of us may leave comments or words to express our condolences, and some of us can reach out over private messages to seek further information or offer additional support. And those are wonderful things to do. I'm not knocking that. But it's hard to support someone in grief over instant messages and texts and Facebook posts, because sometimes there are no words that come immediately to mind. There's nothing we can say in that moment. So we just click on the sad face and keep scrolling. But it's different when you're in person with someone, when you're looking into their eyes after they've just shared a distressing piece of news with you. You can't just pull out your phone and text them a sad emoji or show them a frowny face. I mean, I suppose you could, but I would highly recommend not doing that. Do you remember what you did during those times of being present with someone who has had something awful happen in their life? Do you remember that moment when they shared that with you? When you looked in their eyes and you saw their grief, when you heard the hurt in their voice and saw the way that they maybe hunched in on themselves almost, as though they're trying to protect themselves from more pain, or when they threw their shoulders back, even as tears were glistening in their eyes. Do you remember being with someone in their grief? What did you feel in that moment? What did you say? What did you do? There is a strong desire in us to fix that which has been broken, to heal the harm that's been caused. When we see someone hurting, there is this compassion that dwells up in us, and we want to do something. We want to fix it. We want to step into this mess that this world is and do something about it, and there is nothing wrong with that. But you may have just remembered that sometimes there are no words that you can say or actions that you can take that will fix what has been harmed. Sometimes there is nothing that will fix this hurt other than time. And time is not something that it's always easy for us to give. Sometimes all that we can do when someone else is grieving, when someone else has shared hurt with us, is to simply be with them in that grief. And that is hard. It's hard and it's uncomfortable, and sometimes it feels so scary. When Paul writes to the Philippians, he is seeking to do a lot of things. He is wanting to encourage them in their ministry as they continue to grow as a church. He wants to offer instruction and tell them of the things that he has observed about the world and about faith since his time with them in person. But in however small a way, he is also offering them an opportunity to share in his grief, to be present in the uncertainty that he is feeling of what comes next. He is extending an invitation to them to be fully authentic with one another, to be authentic with him, and to simply be present, even when far apart. That's something that we've had to work on a lot lately. When others have been sharing their grief and we haven't been able to be up close and in person with them, we've been having to learn how to hear the grief of others, how to hold that pain, and how to be with them even from a distance. But that sadness and that need to be authentic even in sadness, I think for the people of the church in Philippi, that being authentic part may have really confused them because they were still figuring themselves out. For some historical context, we need to remember that Philippi was a colony of Rome, but it was so heavily influenced and connected to Rome that they had the nickname of Little Rome. They were far apart, but they were also very close. So that means that they would have followed Roman customs and practices. They would have celebrated their same holidays. When someone who grew up in Rome came to Philippi, they would have felt somewhat at home. It would still be a little smaller. It wouldn't be the full Roman experience. But there would still be this sense of, I know this place. I know how to handle this, how to work through this culture. And a big part of those Roman and Little Roman those practices would have included referring only to the emperor as being Lord. To have Paul, their first pastor, remind them that Christ died at the death of a criminal in an agonizing and painful way on the cross. That Jesus came not as a rich man, as someone that people would want to aspire to be like. Rather, he came as a poor and humble one and lived as a servant, something that most people wouldn't aspire to be. Jesus was all of those things, all these things that they were taught not to want. You don't want to die like a criminal and disgrace your family. You don't want to live as a servant when you could be rich and powerful. To have all of that confusion of sorting through and working through something that is so different from what they grew up hearing, and then to top it off with, we must also declare Christ as Lord. It's easy for us now to say, Jesus Christ is Lord, Lord of all. We're not risking anything when we say that, not the way that these people would have. To declare Jesus Christ as Lord, as their king, would be seen as a major political declaration. It's a challenge to the leadership and power of the emperor, and it's asking a lot of the people to accept this. And yet Paul writes to them saying, you can do this. You can be united. You can come together and recognize the ways in which, yes, Jesus didn't live the life of luxury and riches and power. And yet we still follow him and still recognize his leadership, his grace and his mercy, his authority. All of these things we recognize because of his love. Because yes, Jesus emptied himself and was obedient even to the point of death. But at his most authentic moment, Jesus loved the people. And Jesus was willing to be with the people in whatever place they were at. So yes, it is hard to be a follower of Jesus Christ. It's hard to change and to adjust, to accept this strange reality of giving allegiance to God before the state. And yes, there is sadness and grief as well. There is so much to struggle with and so much to hold, and it's hard to hold all of that from a distance, especially when you only have a letter for guidance, and it takes time to send letters back and forth. And it takes time and effort to sort through all the emotions and all the questions and all the wondering. It takes time. But to sort through all of it, to figure it out, it also requires us to be authentic. In our joy and in our sadness, in our love and in our grace, in our anger, we have to be authentic. We have to be willing to be ourselves and to offer ourselves to God. Because God has never wanted false worship from us. And we may not be we are definitely not facing the same challenges that the people of Philippi faced. Our challenges and struggles are different. They were facing political struggles of how do I follow this faith? How do I work within this religion that could literally get me killed in horrific ways? The struggle that all of us are facing today, whether we are Christians or not, actually, is how can I be my fully true, authentic self? Because we live in a world that for some reason has decided to tell us that we're too fat, we're too scrawny, we're too tall, we're too tiny, too much, too little. We're not enough, or we're too quiet. Maybe we feel uncertain. We're too young to do this thing. We're too old to try something new. We're too emotional or afraid or angry. We're too much. We're too little. We need to change ourselves to fit what others want us to be. We need to hide ourselves, chip parts away to be what others want. I said that Christ is looking for change, and that change is a part of growth. And I mean that. But there is a difference in changing because you want to change, because you recognize the need to change in yourself, versus changing because someone else told you that who you are is wrong. Christ is looking for our authentic selves. And in that authenticity, he is looking for us to love others, to be present, to be in the moment. And there is so much that is telling us that it is too scary, that it is too hard to be our true self. But there is a voice. There is a spirit that speaks into our sadness and desperation, that speaks into those moments when we wonder if our self will ever be enough. And that Spirit is whispering, be who God created you to be. In this moment, be yourself and figure out how to accept the self that others bring to you. Be the true self that God has created and learn to live and work together, not for my sake, but for the sake of the kingdom. Because the only way there can be true love, the only way that we can truly be with one another, is when we actually allow ourselves to truly be. Would you please pray with me? Holy God, more than sadness, more than joy, we are more than our emotions. You are calling us to be in the moment with one another, to be in the moment with you. Help us, Lord, to hear your voice and to listen to our own voices, to accept ourselves so that we may better accept others. Help us to hear the voice of truth that is speaking to us through the storm and through the silence. In the name of your Son we pray. Amen.
Do to have the kind of faith it takes to climb out of this boat I'm in and onto the crashing waves, to step out of my comfort zone into the realm of the unknown where Jesus is, and he's holding out his hand, but the waves are calling out my name and they laugh at me, reminding me of all the times I've tried before and failed. Oh, the waves that keep on telling me time and time again, boy, you'll never win. You'll never win. But the voice of truth tells me a different story. Oh, the voice of truth says do not be afraid. Oh, the voice of truth says this is for my glory. Out of all the voices calling out to me, I will choose to listen and believe the voice of truth. And oh, what I would do to have the kind of strength it takes to stand before a giant, or just a sling and a stone, surrounded by the sound of 1,000 warriors shaking in their armor, wishing they'd had the strength to stand. But the giant's calling out my name and he laughs at me, reminding me of all the times I've tried before and failed. But the giant keeps on telling me time and time again, boy, you'll never win. You'll never win. But the voice of truth tells me a different story. Oh, the voice of truth says do not be afraid. Oh, the voice of truth says this is for my glory. Out of all the voices calling out to me, I will choose to listen and believe the voice of truth. The storm was just the right size to put the giant on the ground, and the waves, they don't seem so high from on top of them looking down. I will soar on the wings of eagles when when I stop and listen to the sound of Jesus singing over me. Oh, the voice of truth tells me a different story. Oh, the voice of truth says do not be afraid. Oh, the voice of truth says this is for my glory. Out of all the voices calling out to me, I will choose to listen and believe the voice of truth.